Greetings and welcome to Elect Connect, a candidate forum brought to you by the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. I'm Mary Morgan, the Chamber's Director of Advocacy and Public Policy. And we're talking with Greg Knott, who's a candidate in the Republican Party primary for District 62 in the Indiana House of Representatives. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsors for Elect Connect. Without them, this work would not be possible. Those sponsors include German American Bank, Bunker & Robertson, the City of Bloomington, Hoosier Energy, Smithville, and Indiana University. And once again, we're speaking right now with Greg Knott. He's going to be in the Republican Party primary on June 2nd as a candidate in the Indiana House of Representatives race for District 62. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you.
I'd like to start out by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in running for office.
Yeah, well, I'm born and raised here in our county. I grew up in Ellisville and went to Edgewood High School and then graduated from Indiana University in 1997. My degree is in public affairs with a concentration in environmental science. And then I've been working here locally at a land surveying, civil engineering, and GIS firm since 2000. And I also own some rental property here in town and just really connected with the community. And my first job out of college actually was down at Crane Naval Base working for a defense contractor. So I know how important Crane is to our local economy. And just want to represent the local people rather than, fall in line with some kind of party leadership in Indy.
Okay, well, thanks for that. Our first question, obviously with the COVID-19 pandemic being top of mind, what assistance do you think the state can and should provide for local businesses during this time?
I think focusing on the aid part of it is probably the wrong approach. And we really just need to, in the closures, in the lockdowns, reopen the economy and get people back to work. I think that the growing evidence is that these closures aren't the driver of what prevents deaths and saves lives and flattens the curve. If we look out at South Dakota, they didn't have any business closures and they've had to date 17 deaths. About half of those were 70 years or older. And they've actually just thrown their governor a parade this week because they were thanking her for keeping their state open and keeping everybody employed during this. So I don't think I think the choice people want to frame it as is, well, it's the economy versus saving lives. And I really don't think that's a proper framing at all. I think it's really everyone wants to save lives and everybody wants to keep this virus in check. But it's just a matter of, are these closures helping do that or not? Or are they just adding to our problems? And I think the evidence is clear that they're just adding to our problems. And that if you get people back to work, that's what they want to do, that's what they can do, and then they don't need the assistance. They're operating with maybe not full capacity, of course. People are still going to stay home as much as they can and work remotely, and this will be a downtime, but it won't be like you're completely out of work.
Okay. Well, I would say even if we ended up opening up completely tomorrow, there's an expectation that state revenues are going to take somewhat of a hit from what we've seen so far with the pandemic. As you know, the state legislature is moving into a budget year. Are there any particular priorities you would have if the state needs to make budget cuts? And are there any areas that you think need more support, not less?
Well, as far as the more support, not less, I'd put teachers right up there at the top. I don't know how we've gone this long and haven't given teachers the pay raises they deserve. But my approach on that is, I think we need to bypass the local school districts on it and give teachers either a bonus check or a raise directly from the state. Because if you look at the local school districts, if you look at what they're spending money on, it's not getting to the classroom. It's these lavish athletic facilities and things that don't really impact the academics as much as great teachers do. So that would be at the top of my priorities for what's not getting enough resources that desperately needs it. As far as what's getting too much, I think there's always places we can save. I think right now we'd be a lot better off if we were cutting the state's part of the unemployment insurance, since the federal government is providing $600 per person for unemployment insurance, and that's more than just the federal portion alone is more than a lot of people make working full time. And I think it's a very short-sighted and distortionary impact on the economy to have unemployment and joblessness pay more than full-time employment than work. And I don't know how we're going to get people to come back to work if we're paying them more to stay home. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay. Our next question comes from one of our members, and they wanted to know that in light of potentially decreased tax revenue due to the COVID-19 pandemic, would you consider legalizing marijuana? Why or why not?
Yeah, I'm with State Representative Jim Lucas on this. He's a Republican from Seymour. He's been working on this issue for years. I think it's way past time that Indiana legalizes at least medical marijuana, at least cannabis for people that have a medical prescription from their doctor. I know there's a lot of veterans groups they're very much wanting access to this treatment for veterans, and really I think anybody that has a medical need for that should have access to it, and the politicians should quit standing in between doctors and their patients.
Okay. I'm sure you're aware of this. In the past, we've seen tension between the state legislature and local municipalities, particularly Bloomington. What's your view of Indiana's Home Rule Act, and how do you determine when the state should step in and limit the actions of local government?
Oh, the state of Indiana is the original sovereign, and any powers that Bloomington or the county or any local government entity has is completely a creation of state government. So I actually think that local entities have way too much power, and there's a lot of abuse of that locally. I know we've seen that with housing development. We've got not nearly enough housing stock in Bloomington for the housing needs, and that's really driven up the price and made housing unaffordable. I think the state of Indiana needs to step in and just do what some of the other states have done. You look at Oregon and I believe it's the city of Minneapolis. They've both stepped in and said, you can't have single family zoning. You can have single family housing, but you can't mandate that throughout an entire area. It just drives the housing cost up way too much. So that's an area where I think is ripe for the state to step in and stop the local abuses. Another one is this climate tax that Bloomington has proposed. I just think that's horrible, with the taxation without representation. There's people that live out in the unincorporated parts of Monroe County and Ellettsville and Steinsville. Those people won't have their voices heard through the ballot box at all. The city of Bloomington, with their city council, could pass that 5-4, just a narrow majority on the city council, and they could pass this tax, a 0.5% tax on people's paycheck, on people that never had a say about it. If I were proposing something at the State House, I think we ought to eliminate the city's ability to do that and have a county-wide voter referendum, much like we do for school funding referendums. Why doesn't every resident of the county have a yes or no vote for these income taxes? That just doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay. I would say, and maybe you agree or disagree with this, that in many ways, state legislators actually have limited influence. It's a part-time legislature, and the executive branch holds quite a bit of power. How would you plan to approach your work so that the constituents have a voice in state government?
Yeah, the state reps do have very limited power, and a lot of the reason for that is that the party leadership is way too powerful, and we've got the wrong people in those positions. So instead of voting for the same old as far as the speaker goes, so I think we need new leadership and get some of these bills that have been stuck in committee. You mentioned medical marijuana earlier. That gets put in committee and killed there by leadership each and every session. And there's many good bills that they're well crafted by state representatives. They're much needed by Hoosiers, and the party leadership puts it in a committee with a chairperson they've handpicked to kill them. And I think that's just not the right approach, and that we need to devolve and decentralize the power in the state house and get new leadership in there and make every state representative have more influence on crafting legislation and getting bills to the floor. And if we decentralize down to the state reps, I think that will also empower each one of those state reps' constituents as well.
Well, that concludes our list of questions. Are there any final thoughts you'd like to share?
There are. My opponent has signed a number of these pledges, and I have as well. And I think they're great. I think they let people know where you stand on an issue. But the only thing is, I think we need to honor these pledges once we get in office, or they don't mean anything. For example, this is the taxpayer protection pledge that I've signed, and that my opponent also signed when he first ran in 2016. Well, as soon as he got in office, he raised our taxes. Now we have the 6th highest gas taxes in the country. I'm not saying that's the best policy or not the best policy, but if you sign a pledge, I think you need to stick to it. And that's not the only pledge that he's broken. So I really want to emphasize that I'm going to stick to, if you see my name on a pledge, I'm going to honor it.
All right. Well, thank you very much again for joining us. A reminder to anyone watching, we've been talking with Greg Knott. He's going to be in the Republican Party primary on June 2nd as a candidate in Indiana House Representatives for District 62. One final thank you to our Elect Connect sponsors, including German American Bank, Bunga Robertson, the City of Bloomington, Hoosier Energy, Indiana University, and Smithville. And then finally, an urge to vote in the primary on June 2nd. This year, all registered voters can vote by mail, and we would encourage you to do so. You can get more information about all of this at monroecountyvoters.us and on the Chamber's website at chamberbloomington.org/2020-primary election. Thanks again for joining us.